Hello again, everybody. With the Hall of Famer John Dodds and our marvelous producer Jason Ruck, I'm Tom Pippins. Welcome to another edition of the MarquetteHoops.com basketball show. As always, we are brought to you by Moonlight Graham. Modern dental benefits. Moonlight Graham, a proud sponsor of the program. Craig Caston is our MVP. We appreciate him. Kevin Byrne, another great get by you. We've got so much to cover, but it was all about Marquette and Al McGuire. We can't wait to share this.
He was the sports information director for Marquette from 1974 through 1977. And when I was in high school, I looked at Kevin with a lot of respect, wanted to come and work for him. And when Rick Majerus told me that after working at his camps that I was the least athletic 6'6" post player he'd ever coached, but I'd worked at the camps. What could I do for you, John? I said, could you get me a job in sports information working for Kevin Byrne? And he said, John, unfortunately, Kevin Byrne's gone, but I can make a phone call and get you in. So really, that's all my experience with sports information really was Kevin Byrne, reading about him when I was in high school.
You will love this man.
I get the job at Marquette. I never interviewed with Al McGuire. I had been the sports editor of the Marquette Tribune when I was a junior, so I did interview him then. And so now my first day on the job at Marquette, I get the call to come to Al's office. And I go in there, and he looks at me, he goes, I remember you. You're the wrestler. You know, because sometimes I would interview Al when I was in my practice gear, my tights, because my practice started the same time his practice was. Then he was, when I was supposed to see him, was supposed to be before practice. Of course, he's always a couple minutes late. And so I'd be in my gear, like running in place, trying to, keep my weight down, waiting for coach to come in. But then if a player was there waiting to see him, he would dismiss everybody around him. And the player, he heard the player first. He always heard the player first. And he was amazing that way. And even that day, my first day at Marquette, I know who you are, the wrestler. He's now explaining that he doesn't need a PR guy to me. And, I'm just kind of sitting there chuckling, they're paying me for this. And then they had just lost the NCAA championship to North Carolina State. And Maurice Lucas sticks his head in the door. And it's just, sorry, coach, I didn't know you had somebody in here. I'll come back. He said, no. I think I know what you're here for. This is the new SID. I said, Kevin. He goes, Kevin. and he goes, he's probably going to want to hear what you say anyway. And so I get up while I'll leave and give you privacy. And Al said, no, you stay. So Luke pulls up a chair right across from Al at the desk. There's Al's on one side, Luke's on the other, I'm over on the side. And he says, Coach, I talked with my agent, and I immediately think, oh, this is a bad thing, because the NCAA says you can't have an agent. And he goes, and he says that I'll be a top 5 pick in the NBA, and that the Kentucky Colonels offered me a 3-year guarantee, whatever the number was, $300,000, or was it $1 million at $300,000 a piece? I don't know that, whatever it was. And so Al looks at him and goes, okay, I appreciate you telling me. He says, Luke, here's what I think you need to understand. The Jesuits don't care if you come back. The Jesuits care if I come back. Because they'll expect me to get one just like you.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, no, Coach, I came here because I think we're going to win an NCAA championship, because the guy sitting there is going to carry us. And he's encouraging now Maurice to leave. And so Luke stands up, that huge body, and shakes Al's hand. He goes, Coach, I appreciate the honesty. And the next day we had a press conference announcing Maurice Lucas was going hardship. And he signed with the Kentucky Colonels. And I thought, well, that's an amazing conversation that I was privy to. Al used to say, it's always the third thing from somebody. So it's, you hear from somebody, you see somebody, or somebody has a meeting with you, and they go and they're talking about, you see, they pump you up. Oh yeah, you look good. What are you doing? And hey, did you go on a trip? And then the third thing is, Coach, I need to borrow some money. So he says, remember, in business, it's always the third thing. So that's one of the life lessons Al gave me. The third thing.
And you did get that national championship, though. I can't imagine, Kevin, how fun it must have been for you to be a part of that.
Well, it was fantastic. If you recall the year before, Al says, the NCAA sits in smoke-filled rooms and finds ways to screw Al McGuire. If my team goes back for the NCAA tournament, I will not go back because I hurt my team in the NCAA tournament. And Hank and Rick will coach a team in the NCAA. Well, then the next year comes and he announces before the season that it's his last season. And then we get the NCAA bid after a rough last week of the regular season at Michigan at halftime. And so in briefing him before he meets with the media, I say to him, well, Coach, the first thing they're going to ask is, are you going to the tournament? And he looks at me like, what? And I go, yeah, remember last year? And he said, so they're going to ask what? I said, they're going to ask, are you going to the tournament? And he goes, of course I'm going to the tournament. and they say, well, they're going to ask why after what you said last year. And he looks at me like I'm an idiot. He goes, well, that's easy. I changed my mind.
Well, Kevin, what was it like after that? You lost to Indiana, and it was unfortunately the Mid-East tournament. And ironically, when you study Marquette in that whole decade, Al went to the NIT when he wasn't assigned to the Mid-East tournament. But the two times Marquette went to the Final Four, they were in the Midwest tournament. They could get away from the Big Ten, get away from Ohio State, Michigan State, all those Purdue, all those teams, and you get away from Kentucky, Rick Mount. Yeah, you get away from that. But what was it like after at least that Indiana game? And it was a close game. It was number one against number two in the country. And I think that game made the NCAA consider seeding and equalizing the brackets. If you can talk to the Indiana game.
Well, first of all, I think, John, the whole country understood that the winner of that game was going to win the NCAA championship. And Indiana was undefeated, and they were spectacular. And I was sitting on the bench with Coach McGuire before the game, and you don't know who the officials are going to be. And Irv Brown trots out onto the floor, the referee, Irv Brown, who had called out for the Tees in North Carolina State's NCAA championship. So Irv comes over to shake Al's hand. And so Al kind of holds his hand when Irv shakes his hand. He says, hey, Irv, you see these cameras here? The cameras here are to see the team. If they see you, you haven't done a good job. And you could tell it irritated Irv. And then he trotted away. And I looked at Coach, and I remember saying, well, that went well. And then, of course, he gives him gives Al two technicals in the last minute of the game. And and that really, we had a chance until Bo puts a turnaround jumper up, and Kent Benson gives him a shove on the hip. It was right in front of me. I remember seeing it. And Bo throws up a short shot from 10 feet. And Al jumps up and says, hey, that's my All-American. He doesn't shoot like that. Call the foul. You, Irv Brown, I'm talking to you. Call the foul. And Irv Brown turned around and gave him a technical. And now Al had kicked the big NCAA sign that was a board at that time. It was a wooden board. So when he kicked it, it did make a loud noise. And but I'm thinking, well, that's not worth the technical, And then I can't use the whole thing. I don't think I'll describe it as best I can. Al wasn't fouled all the time. His language was usually pretty good. And so as we rush a shot, now they're going back up, and what could have been or should have been a 1-point game is now going to be, a 7 or a 9-point game after the first technical. And they used to get the ball after the technical, the other team did. And so Al is running up the floor. It's the last sequence of the game. And Al's beginning to take off his sport coat. And he goes, Irv Brown, I'm talking to you. He goes, do you mind if I take my clothes off? I've never been screwed with them up. Now those aren't the exact words he used.
Right.
But Irv spun on him and gave him the second technical. And then Al goes to tirade after the game and said, I'm not a bum. I'm not from the Bowery. I'm not coming back to the NCAA. I am not a wacko. I am not a nut. I'm a good basketball coach. And words to that effect. And I was sitting with Pete Axtell, at that time, of sports editor of Newsweek. And he says, your coach saying, I am not a wacko is like Richard Nixon saying, I am not a crook. So even in that sad moment, I smile a little bit. But that was a rough moment because that team could have been the national championship. A lot of games, like Jerome's Tippin the next year, are decided on one play. But I felt that game was really decided on a non-call where Kirk Benson, the Indiana center, had his hand on Bo's hip. And when Bo did that little turnaround jumper he often did just inside the free throw line, his shot came up short.
That arguably could be considered Marquette's best team. You had Lloyd Walton and Butch Lee at guards, Earl Tatum at small forward, Bo Ellis and Jerome Whitehead in the front line. And it had everything. And they were, 27-1 coming into that game. And Indiana was probably 28-0. It was hype beyond belief. The cover of Sports Illustrated that week. And it was just really disappointing.
We were in the same hotel. This is an amazing thing, guys. There's a brand new hotel. They put both teams in the same hotel, which was odd. And we went down for breakfast one morning, and the rule was you had to show up for breakfast, for the players. And Indiana was in there eating breakfast, and Indiana had blazers on. They had the nice sport coats for breakfast, and we came in like Al. Some players were in jeans, and there were a couple people wearing Milwaukee Classic warm-up suits that each player had been given during that. And Lloyd Walton from Chicago and Quinn Buckner, the great guard from Indiana, knew each other. And I was walking behind Lloyd Walton, and Buckner says to him, he goes, nice, you guys dress up nice for breakfast, Lloyd. And Lloyd Walton looked at him and gave him an Al McGuire answer. He goes, hey, Quinn, he said, when are you going to be old enough to dress for yourself? And way to go, Lloyd.
Yeah. Slam dunk.
Just after that game, something amazing happened in the off season. There was the 1976 Olympics. And I had Jim Boylan on last month on the show, and I don't know if you had a chance to look at that. We sent it to you, but I asked Jim about that. I said, Jim, I'm watching the Olympics, and I think Sugar Ray Leonard was boxing, and all of a sudden they said, well, wait a second, let's go to the basketball arena. USA is playing Puerto Rico, and an amazing thing's happening. And then I think Frank Gifford comes on and says, this kid from Marquette who's playing for Puerto Rico, Butch Lee, has 35 points, and it's a 1-point game at the end. And did you watch that, or what? Tell us what it was like on campus.
Well, I did. It was fantastic to see Butch shine that way. It shows you how good Butch Lee is. Where his country basically said, "We're putting the ball in your hand. Go beat the greatest team in the world, the United States." what's even more fascinating then is the first day of practice the following season. There's a reporter from the Chicago Tribune Sunday magazine. They're going to do a cover piece on Al McGuire. And I'm sitting with him, and Gary Rosenberger twice in a row blows by Butch, who's gained a couple pounds in the offseason, and makes layups. And Al goes, "Hey, Butch, wake up. Wake up. This is the start of the season. Wake up." And then, Rosie beats him again, and Al screams. He goes, "Hey, Butch, you're not playing with the Puerto Ricans anymore. You're playing for Marquette. We play defense here. And oh, by the way, if you made your last shot, you would have won."
Oh,
And well, I go, I guess that puts the game in perspective.
They always say that Dean Smith is the only coach or only person alive that could hold Michael Jordan under 20 points a game. I think Al McGuire might have been the only one to hold Butch Lee under 20 points a game. He averaged 13 that previous year. But Boylan said it didn't surprise him at all because Quinn Buckner would beat people with his physicality. And he said nobody was more physical than Butch Lee.
I remember, speaking of that, I remember a practice, and Marquette really had 5 plays. But there were 5 variations of 5 plays because he could put each of the 5 players at different positions. But they're running a play in practice, and there used to be baseline screens set by Jerome. And so the 2 forwards, Bill Neary and Bo Ellis, are doing basic screens back and forth. So Butch gets the ball and dumps it into Bill Neary when he comes over, from on that side of the court. And Al stops practicing. He looks at Butch. He says, "What are you doing?" And he goes, "I'm running the play, Coach." You see Butch was perturbed. He goes, "You're running the play. You gave the ball to Z," which is his nickname for Bill Neary. That's another story. But anyway, so he throws it to Bill Neary. He goes, "Look at who you threw to. He can't play. He can't shoot. Wait till the other guy comes because he's good." Okay? And I'm looking at Bill Neary, and Bill Neary accepts that like he's telling the truth. Bo should have the ball, not me. And so Al was great at big picture, just great at big pictures. Hank and Rick were so good at the intricacies of the game and the small things that win games and can lose games. But Al would always see the big picture. Throw it to the right guy, Butch.
You could talk about Marquette. I think we've got about 10 shows here. It's delightful. And we haven't even gotten into, oh, by the way, the Hall of Fame NFL career. So we've got to get to that. But with your permission, I don't want this to go by the boards. We wouldn't forget anyway. But you talk about Al and your visit at the hospice. I know that a relatively select few of people he loved, and there were so many who loved him, had that opportunity. Would you share what that was like for you, Kevin?
It was December of 2000, and that was the year my team, the Baltimore Ravens, we won the Super Bowl after that year. I'd never taken a day off in the season, and Rick Majerus called me on a Wednesday, and he says, "Hey, Coach is going to die in the next couple of days, and we should go see him." And so Rick was going to come in from Utah, and so I said, "Okay, I'll do that." So I ended up flying from Baltimore to O'Hare, and I was going to miss Friday. So that morning, just before I'm leaving home, I get a call from Rick, and Rick says, "Hey, I got into the hospice last night and saw Coach. They don't let any visitors in." So Rick is telling me, "I'm going to go back to Utah, but here's how you sneak in," and he's expecting you to come. And so Rick is telling me how to sneak into the hospice. You walk by the front desk like you know what you're doing. You don't go to the elevator. You go down the stairs because he's downstairs. So I go downstairs and I can't find his room. Rick had given me bad directions. And so I find a door with no name on it. So I knock on the door and I hear, "Hey," and I recognize his voice. I said, "Coach, it's Kevin." He goes, "Come on in." And so it's a small room and there's a chair and a bed, and he's in the coach is in the bathroom. Al's in the bathroom, and he says, "I'll be out in a minute." And when he comes out, I'm just startled a little bit because Al's an erect man, a tall man, and his body has shrunk, but it's still erect, and his head seems huge to me because his body has shrunk so much. And it's painful for him to move. He gives me a little hug, and then he said, "It'll take me a little while to get to the bed." He said, "But once I lie down on the bed, I'll be okay." And he goes, "They want to give me drugs to make me feel better, but I'm dying, and I want to be aware. So I don't want to take the pain medication. I want to be aware because you only die once." And so then he sits there, and he starts talking about death, and he goes, "I love my family, and my family's great, and the grandkids come in here, and they all come in, and Pat and Allie and Noreen, and they're all saying, 'Oh, you look good today. You look good.' He goes, 'I don't look good. I know I don't look good.' He goes, 'They're all afraid of the elephant in the room.' Then he kind of sits up. He goes, 'The elephant in the room is I'm in the hospice because I'm dying. I'm going to die. I don't look good, and I want to talk about it.' And then he smiles and he goes, 'I remember my Catholic upbringing.' And he goes, 'So I remember that if you did confession before you died, you went to heaven. So if there is a heaven, I decided I'm going to do a confession. And I asked them to give me a priest that didn't speak English.' And it made me laugh. And he goes, 'But they didn't listen to me. They brought some young priest in here who spoke English, and he sat right where you're sitting, and he said, "Well, tell me your sins." And so I was trying to remember the 10 Commandments, and I wasn't quite sure of all of them. But so I looked at the priest. He says, "Well, Father, I've done some bad things in my life, and I'm really sorry for them. But I know I never killed anybody." And I know that's one of the commandments, and so that made me laugh, of course, and then we're talking a little bit more. He was writing his autobiography, and I said, "Well, have you been working out for a while?" He said, "Yeah, a little while." And so he said, "You want me to read you some of it?" So he takes out this 8.5 by 11 pad, and he reads me single space a page and a half, and it was fascinating. It was about finding his father drunk on a beach at Rockaway in New York, and how there was typical Al, sand in his pockets and sand in his cuffs, and my dad had to worry about what he was going to tell my mom when he got home because he had come to the beach to sleep it off. And I go, "God, that's really good." I said, "How far are you in your autobiography?" He says, "Well, that's what I have so far." And I said, "Well, that's hopeful." And he laughed. He goes, "Now that's the best line I've heard."
Yeah.
And so then I kind of looked down at my watch. He goes, Did you just look at your watch?" I said, "No." He goes, "You looked at your watch." I go, "Coach, I didn't look at my watch." He said, "Don't lie to a dying man. You looked at your watch. Tell me why you looked at your watch." I said, "Well, I have a flight out of O'Hare." And he goes, "What time?" And I said 4:15 or whatever it was. And he goes, "You have 20 minutes. At 20 minutes, I'll tell you when it's up. I'll hug you and say goodbye." And then I heard somebody in his bathroom, Al's bathroom. I said, "Coach, there's somebody in your bathroom." And he smiled. He goes, "Well, you know what they do here? If you share a room with somebody, it's $100 less a day. if you share a bathroom with somebody, it's like $50 less a day. So I asked them to put me next to some guy who was going to die right away. So I at least have my own bathroom. At least have my own bathroom for a little while. That's how his mind worked. He always wanted to win. He wanted to win the competition for the inexpensive room at the hospice. And so you hear this woman in there with this guy named Henry. And Al looks at me and goes, Henry soiled himself. And she's cleaning it up. And then you hear the woman say, Henry, no, I do this all the time. I'm paid to do this. Don't worry about it. No, don't cry, Henry. Please, please, you'll make me cry. And Al looked at me and he goes, that is kindness. This is less than, Al goes, this is less than 10 minutes from my house. And this kindness is here every single day. And I never knew it. So, you came to see a dying man. I'm going to give you dying man advice. Go be kind. Be part of kindness for the rest of your life. Because kindness is the biggest thing we have. And I'm just taken aback. So profound. And then he looked at his watch a little while after he made me laugh some more, and he goes, you got to go. And he struggles to get up out of the bed. I go over there and we hug, and I said, well, Coach, I'll come back and see you. He goes, no, you won't. He goes, you go back and live your life. I'm going to die. As it turned out, he lived another month and maybe 5 weeks. And he ends up dying the Friday before the Super Bowl. And I decided not to go back to the funeral, John, because I couldn't top what I just experienced. And but he fascinated me and educated me right to the end.
Kevin Byrne, we have an entire show to talk about as it relates to his experiences in the NFL all the way to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And John, we want to talk a little bit about your website. I don't want to get away without your chatting about it because it's a good one.
Absolutely. Thank you. Sure. MarquetteHoops.com is the site. We archive if you go to the top left-hand corner in that column, you can see where the archive of the shows are, this show and other shows. If you want to be on our newsletter, it's the top right-hand corner. Just drop your email address in there. Be kept abreast of updates, including Marquette player transactions, that type of thing, and upcoming guests.
Kevin Byrne, brought to you by Moonlight Graham, a proud sponsor of the MarquetteHoops.com basketball show. Moonlight Graham, modern dental benefits. For John Dodds, our producer, Jason Ruck, I'm Tom Pippins. Thanks for being with us, everybody. See you again soon, and go Golden Eagles. God bless.